Hello and welcome to the Western PA CoC Written Standards Training. This training is specific for providers who operate transitional housing projects, including the transitional housing portion of joint component TH-RRH projects. My name is Lauren Whitley. I work for Diana T. Myers and Associates, or DMA, and we are the consultant for the Western PA CoC. What are the written standards? They are required by HUD. Every CoC must have a set of written standards that guides the operation and service delivery of ESG and CoC funded projects. The goal of the written standards is to ensure that all programs are operating in compliance with HUD and CoC expectations and are operating in a consistent and coordinated way. The written standards document is designed to go above and beyond HUD's minimum requirements and really act as a tool and guidebook for providers operating ESG and CoC projects. The written standards are divided into three main sections. There's standards for all project types. So those standards apply to all projects. So if you have not already watched the recorded training on those standards, please make sure you do so. The second section are standards by project type. So these are really project specific, above and beyond the standards for all project types. And that's what we're going to be covering. In this presentation, we'll be covering the project specific standards for transitional housing projects. And the third part of the document are the appendices, which provide supplemental resources and information that are referenced throughout the document. There's a supplemental optional forms and templates, and that's a separate document and really available to folks as a resource. So let's dive in. Again, if you have not already watched the training on standards for all project types, please make sure you do so. This training is focused on the requirements that are specific to transitional housing, including the transitional housing portion of joint TH-RRH projects. So how do folks access transitional housing? Referrals must come through coordinated entry, and projects must follow the CoC's order of prioritization in filling vacancies. Transitional housing should be low barrier and while honoring eligibility and prioritization criteria. Who is eligible for transitional housing? Folks can be either category 1, literally homeless. So they're staying in a place not meant for habitation, like a shelter, their car, the streets, or they're fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, meeting the category 4 definition of HUD's category 4 definition of homelessness. And the household must either present with multiple barriers to obtaining and retaining housing, or have one primary barrier other than economic or financial. And that requirement is really to emphasize that because transitional housing is providing more intensive supports, a higher level of supports, that folks whose primary barrier to housing stability is economic or financial in nature, those wouldn't necessarily be participants to get prioritized for transitional housing. An important note regarding chronic homelessness status: if a household presents as experiencing chronic homelessness, once they're enrolled in transitional housing for longer than 7 days, they lose that chronic homelessness status. So we'll cover this a little bit more in this presentation, but really important to ensure that folks are making an informed decision when enrolling in transitional housing and understand the implications if they're going to lose their chronic homelessness status, and that they might lose eligibility for other types of services. So the CoC's prioritization for projects is broken into 3 brackets. The first priority bracket, who would be prioritized above all other households, would be special populations designated by the CoC. And at the time of this recording, there are no special populations designated by the CoC, with the exception of folks who have requested an emergency transfer under VAWA, under the Violence Against Women Act. And so those would be folks who need to move from their current unit of housing to another unit of housing as quickly as possible, under an emergency transfer due to safety concerns. So those would be prioritized, those households would be prioritized above all other households. Then there's the second priority bracket, and those are folks experiencing chronic homelessness. And within that priority bracket, things like assessment score, length of time homeless, and considerations brought to coordinated entry regional case conferencing would be considered when determining how to prioritize the households within the chronic homelessness priority bracket. And then finally, the third priority are all other eligible households who do not meet the emergency transfer under VAWA criteria and are not experiencing chronic homelessness. Because transitional housing may serve as crisis housing, if there are no chronically homeless households prioritized for a project, the project may, through coordinated entry case conferencing, prioritize households facing emergency situations, such as high lethality DV situations. Again, reiterating that transitional housing residents who were chronically homeless prior to entering transitional housing lose that chronic homelessness status once they're enrolled in the project for more than 7 days. So it'll be very important for transitional housing projects and coordinated entry assessment centers to help the household in making an informed decision. And folks who are chronically homeless who are being referred to TH should be discussed at CATE's conferencing to ensure that the household's making that informed decision about accepting a transitional housing opportunity. And what does that mean to support the household make an informed decision? That's really explaining other services they may be eligible for and what they may forfeit if accepting a transitional housing enrollment. Helping them navigate the likelihood of being connected to these other potentially more appropriate resources. So when applying the CoC's order of priority, households shall be considered for all the counties they've expressed interest in living in via the coordinated entry process, and then all the counties in the region of the CoC where they are currently experiencing homelessness. When folks are transferring into transitional housing, they get prioritized within those 3 priority brackets that the CoC has established. If a household was chronically homeless at the time of entry into their current project, they would get prioritized in the second priority bracket. So an example would be a household that's in rapid rehousing that's looking to transfer into transitional housing. If they were chronically homeless when they entered rapid, then they would get prioritized in the chronically homeless priority bracket. If they were not, they would be prioritized in the third priority bracket, which is all eligible households that do not meet the chronic homeless definition. And then within each of the CoC's priority brackets, that's determined via case conferencing where a transferring household will be prioritized compared to other households that are currently experiencing homelessness. Some documentation that's specific to transitional housing. It is expected that projects have executed occupancy agreements on file. And then, of course, please refer to the documentation requirements for all project types for additional requirements. Duration and amounts. So transitional housing should be used as temporary bridge housing with stays lasting for only as long as it takes a household to secure permanent housing. While the maximum amount of assistance allowed by HUD is 24 months, enrollment should not exceed 12 months except in extenuating circumstances. So extenuating circumstances could be recent job loss, transition age youth, participant is paying down fines, etc. Average enrollment in transitional housing should be about 6 months or less. So again, enrollments really should not exceed 12 months unless there are extenuating circumstances, and the average length of enrollment, the CoC is looking for that to be about 6 months or less. For longer-term transitional housing, when folks are enrolled for periods longer than 6 or 12 months, that should really be targeted to folks who are facing more severe challenges in finding permanent housing. Amount of assistance. So for transitional housing projects that have rental assistance dollars, rent contributions are mandatory, and the rent contribution or occupancy charge can be the highest of the following three calculations. So it would be the highest of either 30% of the family's monthly adjusted income, 10% of the family's monthly gross income, or if the family is receiving payments for welfare assistance from a public agency and a part of the payments is specifically designated by the agency to meet the family's housing costs, the portion of the payments that's designated for housing costs. So again, if your TH project has rental assistance dollars, rent contributions are mandatory and they are designed to be the highest of the three options that we just covered. If your project does not have rental assistance funding, so maybe it has leasing dollars or operating funds, occupancy charges are optional and they can be lower but not higher than the maximum rent contribution that we just described on the previous slide. So again, if your project has leasing or operating dollars, occupancy charge is optional and it can be lower but not higher than the maximum allowable rent contribution that we covered on the previous slide. Some case management standards specific to transitional housing. Exit planning should start upon project entry, and case managers should offer to meet with participants at least bi-weekly. So throughout the written standards, most of the language references meeting at least monthly, and for transitional housing, the standard is to meet at least bi-weekly. Some performance standards, performance measures for transitional housing. These are based on CoC system performance measures and CoC renewal scoring. Projects are, so the data that is used to evaluate projects on these performance measures is based on HMIS data for project entry assessments, exit assessments, and annual assessments. So this is why timely, accurate data entry is really important. At least 83% of households who exit transitional housing should exit to permanent housing. At least 48% of adults will increase their income. So that's either through employment or benefits. The average length of stay will be 12 months or less. So the target goal is 9 months or less, but the existing performance measure is 12 months or less. And no more than 6% of households who exit to permanent housing will become homeless again within 12 months. So here's some specific standards related to joint TH-RRH projects. And we're focused specifically on the transitional housing portion of those projects. So if you have a joint TH-RRH project, you should follow the rapid rehousing standards for the rapid rehousing portion of the project and the transitional housing standards for the transitional housing portion of the project. You must be able to afford both components to participants, and they must be able to choose whether or not they want to enroll only in transitional, only in rapid, or enroll in both components of the project. To be eligible for joint TH-RRH, households can be literally homeless, category 1, or fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, category 4, or those residing in a transitional housing project that's being eliminated, or those residing in the TH portion of another joint component, a joint component TH-RRH project. And just want to note chronic homeless status. If a household enters the rapid rehousing portion of a joint TH-RRH project, if they were chronically homeless at the time they entered the rapid rehousing portion of the project, they would maintain their rapid rehousing status while they receive the rapid rehousing assistance. They would maintain their chronic homelessness status while receiving rapid rehousing assistance. Prioritization, so the order of prioritization set for transitional housing and set for rapid rehousing should be followed. And projects should be targeting and prioritizing people with high needs, so have multiple barriers to obtaining and retaining housing for joint TH-RRH project enrollment. Amounts of assistance and duration. Again, projects must be able to offer both components, so participants can choose which component they want to enroll in, and including enrolling in both. The maximum duration of support for both components combined is 24 months per household, and the project should be designed to offer enough rapid rehousing to ensure that a household can enroll in rapid rehousing at any point in their enrollment. So they can transition from transitional to rapid at any point in their enrollment. Some unique HMIS setup and reporting requirements. Joint component TH-RRH projects should be set up in HMIS separately. So one TH project in HMIS, one RH project in HMIS, and the APRs must be submitted separately as well. So one APR for TH and one APR for rapid rehousing. Case management requirements specific to joint component projects. If you have operating or leasing dollars and you're using occupancy agreements or subleases, it's critical that the role of the case manager and the role of landlord or property manager be separate and distinct. The role of the case manager is really to engage with participants, build trust, rapport, etc. And the role of the landlord or property manager focuses on holding the participant accountable to their lease. And so these roles and responsibilities should be separate and distinct. So next steps. All CoC and ESG funded projects must sign off by April 30th that they've reviewed the written standards, they understand them, they commit to implementing them, they've watched the recorded trainings, and they will ensure that all new hires moving forward review the standards and watch the recorded trainings within 60 days of hire. So folks will sign off at the link provided on the slide, which will also be shared widely. And then if there are standards that your project is not implementing, so many of the standards are not new, but for those that are new or for those existing that you're not implementing, please make a plan to implement those standards by June 30th. And as always, feedback on the standards is welcome year-round at the link provided on the slide, which will also be shared widely. We really welcome your feedback, and the Written Standards Committee can take your feedback into consideration the next time they update the standards. Thank you all so much. If you have any questions at all, please email the CoC at westerncoc@pennsylvaniacoc.org. Thank you and have a great day.